It is. Well, good evening. It is 8 o'clock and we have our fifth webinar with the pioneers of the three principles. Tonight we are featuring Bill Pettit.
Hier geen geluid, of wel?
I'm going to mute you all if you don't mind.
Ja, heb ik nog niet, maar ik kan ook niet.
Let me try and check that. Except for Bill. Let me see, where are you? Got a big group. Okay. Can I ask you to unmute yourself, Bill? Tonight we are featuring Bill Pettit. Bill Pettit is a psychiatrist who has integrated the principles into his career, more or less. He is very well known and has a very long experience with principles, and I think you were taught by Sid himself. And we are so glad that you are going to give us a short presentation on your views on the principles.
Well, and thank you very much. Yeah. That's a pretty broad but that's it. Is that what you'd like my take on? I'm in my 41st year of being exposed to these universal principles, which are a metaphor. Mr. Banks makes that very clear. They're a metaphor for what's behind life, what's at the source of life, what a lot of people have called many names. A lot of people have called it God. What's behind life, what life is as a human being, and how the two are connected. That's to quote Mr. Banks, and anybody that wants to listen on www.sidbanks.com to his description of his experience. One of the things, he had an extraordinary experience, which is outside the realm of most of our experiences. It's certainly outside the realm of any experience I've had, where he suddenly realized that there's no such thing as insecurity. Like every other experience we have, it's only thought created. That's powerful. But in his experience that was 3 days long, and this was a 43-year-old man with 2 children and married for 14 years and at least, and worked at a mill as a welder, as a master welder in a pulp mill on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. He had a 3-day experience that culminated in the following. He said, I stood up. Suddenly it was like I was being sucked down a tunnel. There was a buzzing sound, and I was enveloped in a white light. It was then that I realized the true meaning of God, and I started to cry. A powerful experience, a profound experience. Sid was my mentor from 1983 until his death in 2009. So for 26 years, I was blessed to have him as a mentor. I think being one of two in kind of the first psychiatrist that really heard a lot of what he was saying, I think he took maybe a special interest in trying to assist me along the way. Do they have April Fool's Day in the Netherlands?
Yes, we do.
Do, okay. Well, many of you have heard me say that it's ironic that I met Sydney Banks on April Fool's Day, 1983. It'll be 40 years. And I had met Dr. George Pransky, who wasn't a doctor at the time, but he was a psychologist, on January 1st of that same year, 40 plus years ago. I myself at the time was just a couple of months shy of 41 years old. I'm 80 now. I'll be 81 May 31st of this year. I feel much younger than that inside. I felt much older than that in 1983. So as I sat in the audience with about 250 other people in a hotel in San Francisco on a Friday evening, followed by a Saturday sessions morning and afternoon and a Sunday sessions morning and afternoon, I was just shy of 41 years of age. I had finished my medical training in 1969. And after 5 years of being in a surgery residency for 2 years and 3 years being drafted into the military to serve as a doctor for a squadron of Navy pilots in 1974, I started, after those 5 years from 69 to 74, I started my 3-year psychiatry residency and graduated in 1977. And when I finished my psychiatry residency, I had had over 800 lectures on mental illness and medications and treatment of mental illness. And I had had 0, not these 3 fingers this year, 0 lectures on mental health. And yet, when I got my board certification in psychiatry, people often referred to me as a certified mental health professional. Which was the farthest thing from the truth. I was a certified mental illness professional. I myself had struggled with intermittent depression for 20 years. I was fortunate enough that I had 6 different caring psychiatrists during that time that were good people. They were caring people. And they helped me through my periods of depression so that I didn't have to stop my college, my medical school, my post-medical school residency training. Even though metaphorically there used to be a time when cars had 8 cylinders, most now have 4 or 6. But using the metaphor of an 8-cylinder car, I think I went through medical school on about 2.5 cylinders because I had such a limited understanding of where my experience, that I was creating my experience. And I was probably 6 to 9 hours a day creating an inner experience of stress and activating what's in our body called the stress response or the fight or flight response. There is a woman researcher from UCLA which actually has added fight, flight, or befriend, because a lot of times, and sadly more women than men, in a stressful situation will not only see either I can beat them or run, but do we have common ground? Can I befriend you? That system was made to be activated up to 30 minutes out of every 24 hours in a life-threatening situation. When we were hunter-gatherers, it may be that we might have needed that fight or flight for up to 30 minutes to survive wild animals and other tribes. But we activate that same system, and I was activating that same system that was meant for my survival to save my own life or those that I cared about or loved. I was activating that same system for years, at least 20 years, 6 to 9 hours a day, with worry, guilt, beating myself up for mistakes, holding on to resentment for things that other people had said or done to me, upset because things weren't the way I wanted them to be, or other people weren't acting the way I wanted them to be, angry a good deal of the time, overanalyzing, spending hours a day. I've got to figure this out. I've got to figure this out. Unresolved grief, not accepting life on life's terms. I used to say that I used to spend, prior to meeting Sid Banks, I used to spend about 40% of every waking day in the past with regrets, I used to call the Uda sisters, but I realized how sexist that was. So I call them the Uda sister, the Uda persons now, Shuddha, Wuda, and Kuda. And their cousins might have been and was gonna. And I spent another 40% of my waking hours in worry and fear. What if? What if? What if? All the things that I attached my happiness to on the outside, if they were threatened or if I perceived them as threatened in any way, I took away my state of well-being using this beautiful gift of thought in a mistaken way. So that does leave 20% of the waking hour that I could have spent in the present moment. But I found a way for those 20 years to even mess up the now. Because I was typically, when I was in the now, I was in judgment of myself or others or circumstances that they weren't the way I wanted them to be. And then I wondered why I felt bad. Metaphorically, it was as if I was spending 6 to 9 hours a day slamming my fist against the right side of my head. And at the end of the day saying, darn, I wish I knew where this right-sided headache was coming from. Going to the doctor and saying, doctor, you got to help me. My head really hurts. I need some pretty strong medicine. No, I don't know where it's coming from. If I knew where it was coming from, I wouldn't be here with you. And I truly didn't. there are studies that have shown that if we activate that system for 30 minutes or less a day, obviously, to me, it shows that we know something, that we have a level of understanding, a level of awareness, a level of consciousness of the connection between our spiritual nature, our formless nature. That has nothing to do with religion when I use the word spiritual. It means the formless nature, that there's something breathing us, breathing me right now. I'm not this body. I get to be in this body, in this world of form, so I can even have this interaction with you, but I know that I'm not this body, and that's comforting to me. So 30 minutes or less a day, people will live in a state of ease the vast, vast majority of the time. If we go from 30 minutes to, at least in this one study, which, made some sense in my experience as being a physician for over 50 years, from 30 minutes to 3 hours, we will move from, when you think of that, that's from 30 minutes to 180 minutes. That's a 600%, 600% leeway that universal mind. I'm going to use the word God, but if people are offended, I had one couple that said, we don't like people using the word God. And I said, well, what word do you like? And they said, we like Dave. I said, fine. Then I'll try to remember Dave. If I say God, you say Dave in your head. Something behind life. The label is, to me, pretty non-important. Some people make it really important, but it's a label. So 30 minutes to 180 minutes, we will go from ease to dis-ease. I don't know what that would be in Dutch, but I'm sure you'll be able to do that. We'll go from ease to dis-ease. And that will, Dave, God, whoever, will, in his benevolence and beneficence, will try to let me know that I'm looking in the wrong direction and that I'm using the gift and the power of thought in a way that's hurtful to myself by setting off alarms. So one alarm will be my mood. I was going to speak in Spain a few years ago, I think before the pandemic, and I was in the shower that morning, and before I was supposed to do a presentation on the mind, big mind, little mind, and body. And I thought, wait, these symptoms, these alarms are more than alarms. They're love letters. They're really love letters. They're from benevolence. They're from kindness. They're from caring. They're from love and understanding, trying to get my attention so that I look in a different direction. My mood will go down. I lose the feeling of being lighthearted and loving. I move, suddenly I find myself serious. If I don't catch myself, the next thing I find myself being irritable. First of all, with the people that I know won't leave me, and then with anybody. And if I keep going, I'll end up severely depressed, isolated, and wondering if life is worth living. Sadly, in the United States, our studies show that about 33% of our population is waking up every morning in overwhelm. And the bottom part of that 33%, we call it languishing. Bottom part of that is wondering whether or not to take their life or not. And sadly, we have a rash with our gun laws and our mental, combined with our mental stress. We have a whole group of people who then have to decide how many people they want to kill before they kill themselves. We've had a tremendous rash of those in recent weeks. But I digress, as I often do. I have a plaque that says, you know, you're Irish if you have absolutely no idea to make a long story short. So my wife says I'm certainly Irish, both Irish and Swedish and Eastern Europe. So our mood goes down, our tension level goes up. We leave a calm, serene, quiet stillness to a feeling of inner tension. Again, if we don't realize that as a salutary alarm, a gift, we now get upset about being nervous and anxious. And we keep feeding the fire innocently, so that now we're having panic attacks. And we're having obsessive thoughts. And we're having compulsions to act in a certain way. And the mental health professional says, oh, well, you have this OCD. We've got a label for everything. Well, you have this chronic mental stress manifesting in a myriad, an infinite number of ways, of which at least almost 400 we've labeled as a disorder. Our mood goes down, our tension level goes up. Our thinking goes from clear and quiet to where we have insights frequently from the unknown. It's with us all the time. And now our thinking is muddled and we're easily distracted. And we're forgetting where we put our keys and our phone, and forgetting that we have a talk to give to the Netherlands at noon your time. We're forgetting. And life gets difficult. So mood, tension, thinking, our body, we start having trouble sleeping because we're pouring large amounts of norepinephrine and epinephrine into our body. And then wonder why we're having restless sleep. And then we're lying there worrying about not sleeping, putting more norepinephrine into it. We start having discomfort or pain somewhere in our body, maybe from an old injury, maybe a new one. For me, my early signs are that I start itching. I've actually got a little place you can see on my hand where I actually picked because I got itching. That's an early sign for me that I'm going too fast with my thinking, or I'm looking in the wrong direction. My relationships get more difficult. And I'm wondering why that's happening. Why is my spouse and the people that I work with suddenly not being very nice? I would have other names that I've lower levels of consciousness, I would call them, not realizing that I had anything to do with the problem. My behaviors, my eating behaviors, my use of food, sex, money, all aspects of life, I start finding it difficult to act in the way that I'd like to, that's healthy for me and for others. As I sat there that day, in April Fool's Day, having gone in and out of depression for 20 years, I suddenly, within 30 minutes, I had a 300-pound weight come off of my chest. I didn't do anything other than try to listen to what Mr. Banks was saying. And what's ironic is I had no idea what he was talking about. But the feeling that he conveyed touched that place of health that's within me and has always been in me and has never been scratched, never been broken, never lacking. And that place of mental well-being, of wholeness, of divine energy, Dave energy, whatever, just needs a crack. And it started to fill me up from the inside. And I felt a quiet that I hadn't felt for many, many, many years. And I felt a hope because I suddenly realized that I was the one doing this. Now, some people say, wait a minute, you were excited that you realized you were the one causing all your stress and not your genes and your upbringing and your spouse and your family and your job? Yes, I was. Because I had little or no control over any of those things. But if my stress, my mental well-being was being taken away by the same person that was in my underbritches and nobody else and no other thing, then there was hope that I might learn how to stop doing this. Even at the beginning, I might have just had the hope that I stopped doing it so frequently, and then I lessened the force of the blow to my head by 20%. Even that would have had a tremendous, let alone literally stopping doing that. And maybe every once in a while and going, well, okay, I got it. Don't need to do that. I know who's doing that. It's not life. It's not my wife. It's not the loss I just incurred in my life. That was the beginning of a 40-year journey. And as you mentioned earlier, I don't know if I integrated it, but I guess that's as good as any. I didn't mix it with anything. It became the core of my psychiatric practice for the next 40 years, nearly 40 years. I retired in December of 2018, but recently, for a number of reasons, I'm now waiting to get my license any day from Arizona, and I'm going to be working in a clinic, a psychiatric clinic and wellness institute that interestingly is owned by a man who was a psychiatric resident, and I was one of his teachers from 2004 to 2007 in our state of West Virginia University at the Sydney Banks Institute, where I was medical director, co-medical director, and medical director and co-director with Judy Sedgman at the Sydney Banks Institute for Innate Health at the West Virginia University School of Medicine. And 15 years later, or 16 years later, here I am going to be working at his clinic 2 days a week on Wednesdays and Thursdays. It's allowed me to know that no matter who was sitting in front of me, they had perfect mental health inside of them. And I'm going to take the last few minutes here maybe to tell a couple of stories. Some of you have heard them, but many of you are new. Would that be okay if I told a couple of stories? So I met Sid in April. I quit my job in California in mid-May. And at the 1st of July, my wife and I started a journey across from California all the way across the country to Florida, to where 3 PhD psychologists were at the Advanced Human Studies Institute in Coral Gables, Florida, outside of Miami. And they were being mentored by Mr. Banks, and he thought it might be a good idea for me to go for a year. I ended up doing a 10-month fellowship with them. So we headed out with my wife and my two small children, I think 5 and 7, and we headed out from California to Florida, across the country. And we stopped off at my parents' home in the middle of Illinois, which is about 180 miles southwest of Chicago, Illinois. And my wife lived in from Peoria, 50 miles away. And the first thing that happened was when I saw my father, and I was now 41 years old. My father and I were very much alike, and we had very little understanding. So we were frequently, not physically, we had trouble even watching a sporting event on television without a 50% chance that one of us would be stalking out of the room, upset. I was in tremendous judgment of my father. I remember that day that we arrived for what was going to be like a 3-day visit. When I saw him, I had different eyeballs than I had before. Either that or he had really somehow really changed. But I think it was my eyeballs. And I saw him through eyes of unconditional love for the first time in my life. I saw that he was no more a perfect man than I was, but he was a good man. He was doing the best he could, given the way he saw the world. And I felt tremendous love for him. And nothing was said that I know of or that I remember, but he must have felt it, because in those next 3 days, he told me many times more stories of his life growing up than he had told me in 40 years. Do I wish that I would have even asked for more stories now that he's been gone a number of years? Yesterday would have been his 109th birthday, but he died in 88. So that was powerful, that I had that experience with my father. My wife, after 3 days, went off with the 2 kids to her home. And I won't go into detail. She passed away in 2000, 31 years after we married in 1969. And she had the same kind of relationship with her mother, her mother was always in judgment of her, that she was either too heavy or too skinny or too long, hair was too long or not long enough, and my wife, instead of, after 2 hours of being there, dreaded it, she said it was different. I saw her through eyes of love for the first time in my life, and I saw that she was just trying to make my life better, thinking that every thought she had about things was the right thing. And I felt so much love for her, and I listened, and I told her how much I appreciated her sharing what was, after 2 hours, what she thought was important for me to know. And then I would take it under reflection, and as I'm sure she had to do as she grew up, that I may not do all of them, but I'm deeply grateful for your caring enough to share and for me to be able to reflect on what you think is important. And then they went out shopping and had a wonderful time. So when I went over after 3 days of 3 additional days at my home with my parents, she looked at me with her big blue eyes and said, "Can we stay here?" I said, "What do you mean? Can we stay here for a year? Because this is so beautiful, this experience of my parents." I said, "Mine with mine too." And so we did. We contacted the 3 psychologists in Coral Gables and told them we'd be there in a year. And within 5 years, 3 of our 4 parents had passed. So we were so grateful that we had taken that year to experience them with fresh eyes. There was a state hospital. I don't know, is there a similar, I mean, it was a state hospital in my hometown. It was famous, actually, did a lot of the research on Thorazine back in the 1950s. And it had still in 1983 had 700 patients in the hospital, 900 employees. It was being targeted to be closed down by the state, so there was tremendous insecurity there. But there was 350 people on the psychiatric side and 350 about on the autism, mental retardation, what we used to call developmental disorder. And interestingly, there was no psychiatrist. The only psychiatrist sat in the front office. All of the patients in that 700-bed psychiatric hospital, their doctors were family doctors who had taken courses in psychopharmacology. So I was, as a psychiatrist, I was really, they would give me consults from all over the hospital. And I had a psychologist that befriended me in some ways. He liked me, and we would have lunch 3 times a week, but he kept telling me that I was full of, I'll use the word poop. Tell me that I was full of poop, saying that everybody was healthy. But he still wanted to have lunch with me. And he admitted to me that he had a severe anxiety disorder that impeded him in many ways in his life outside of the hospital. And he admitted to me that within about 4 to 6 weeks that his anxiety disorder had disappeared, but had no awareness that it had, I still was full of poop. It had nothing to do with our conversations. But he did ask me if I would co-lead a group of people diagnosed as chronic schizophrenia. Many of them had been there many, many years in this state hospital. There was about 22. This was 1983. This was before Clozaril came and helped some of those people get out of the hospital at least. So there was 22 people, and we did these groups on Wednesday afternoons. And for the first 2 of, I'm going to tell you what happened halfway through the 3rd week. But for the first 2 weeks, there was this one man off to the left that sat with his chair kind of askew outside of the group, and he was talking quietly to his auditory hallucinations during the group, and it wasn't bothering. He was talking quietly to his hallucinations, so I didn't see a need to change anything. It didn't seem like it was disrupting the people around him. What happened halfway through the 3rd session, and we had no books then. Second Chance had not even come out. There was no videos. You just talked from your heart of what I had seen, from what Mr. Banks had said. And halfway through the 3rd session, that man suddenly, that was sitting there quietly talking to his voices, stopped. Just laughing. I mean, his whole body shook. He was holding his belly. His eyes were watering. He was laughing so hard. And within a couple of minutes, I think you know what started happening. All 21 of the other clients, myself and the psychologist, are sitting there holding our stomachs, laughing hysterically. Our eyes are watering, and we have no idea why we are laughing other than it's contagious. when somebody touches that place. And we're begging. I'm begging. I said, what's his name? The psychologist said his name is Herb. I said, Herb, stop it, please. Stop. He didn't stop. He went on for probably 7 to 10 minutes. This is when you wish somebody was surreptitiously filming you, because I'd have this on record. He finally stopped. He stopped a couple of times, but he, like an earthquake, he had, and but our hearts go out to those people in Turkey and Syria, where it sounds like over 1,500 people have been killed. A whole other question people would have about that, but he would have aftershocks and he'd start laughing again. And he finally seemed to settle and stop. And I waited till he got his eyes, took a tissue and cleared his eyes and got his breathing back. And then I said, tell me about Herb. And the psychologist said, he's been here 47 years in the state hospital. They tried to get him out a couple of times. Didn't work. I said, okay. I said, Herb, could you tell us what was so funny? And some of you have heard this, but many not, I suspect. He picked up his chair, he put it into the group, and he looked at across, just as I'm looking at you directly into your eyes. And he said, Doctor, while you were talking, I suddenly realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. And he said, jumping beyond what I saw, because I was just hopeful that maybe I would, no, he saw, and I don't have to do it anymore. Wow. Herb saw way beyond me. He not only saw that he was doing it, he saw and understood the system of life well enough. He saw that he didn't have to do it anymore. And I have to admit, my first thought was unsettling. Like, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up to relieve people's suffering, not to have them get fully healthy in front of my eyes after 47 years with a label of chronic schizophrenia on 8 or 10 medications. My job in the next few days was, as quickly as possible and safely, was to get him off large doses of medications that, now that his physiology had changed instantly from pathological to healthy, these medications that had been life-saving were now poisons. To make a long story not so long, not short, Irishmen don't know how to make them short, but not quite so long. It took me 6 weeks to get him out of the hospital before people would finally said, you're right, he's mentally healthy. And I had a 3-year follow-up. The psychologist, I think, started realizing that I wasn't full of poop. And he gave me a 3-year yearly follow-up for 3 years. That he was fine. He was living in an apartment. He had friends. He went down to the senior citizen. He had a girlfriend. They went dancing. They played, they played cards. They whatever. Probably did some other things people, when they love each other, do. And he was on no medications. He was fine. Now, to some people, they'd say you're lying because it's outside of their belief. That's possible. I guarantee you I'm too old to be lying. I go to bed every night with what I say and do during the day. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to take an old man, whatever you want to call it, an old man break for about 2 minutes, and I will be back. It'll give you time to get some questions and for discussion for the last half hour. That be okay?
Thank you so much, Bill.
Okay. You can see my Bermuda shorts as I leave.
Well, get yourself ready to think up some questions. I hope you have a lot. This man has so much experience and is integrated into his psychiatry know-how, which is amazing.
I just wrote the question that we had from Instagram in the chat.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe let's give room to other questions first. If there are any. Nou, ik wil Nederlands praten nu eventjes, hè?
Kan nu wel even, ja.
Hij heeft het over één schizofrene meneer. Ik ben wel benieuwd of hij meer ervaringen heeft met chronische psychiatrische patiënten.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent question. We'll give you the floor in a few seconds.
Stellen jullie hem voor mij?
Okay. Hi, Bill.
Hi. I realized that I didn't even mention universal mind, thought, and consciousness, at least not directly.
You had it wonderfully intertwined into your story.
Okay.
And well, we have all kinds of means of getting stuff from that in the Netherlands. We have a lot of websites and stuff where people can read it in Dutch.
Well, and in my answers, I will bring them in.
Yeah.
And I will give you, if it's okay, so I don't forget, tomorrow, literally in the next 24 hours, my website will be truly launched tomorrow within 24 hours with
Wow.
programs and things. And it's www, if you want to write it down or just have it, you'll have it. It's drbillpettit.com, but it's DR, it's just D little case, DRBILLPETTIT.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
And
just-
that's being launched literally tomorrow.
okay. I just shared it on the chat so anyone can pick it up
Okay.
now.
Good.
We have two questions for now.
Okay.
The first one is from Josje Meester. She asked whether you have any other people with chronic schizophrenia who have experienced, curing.
Yes. Being cured.
Being cured. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I do. And here's what I would encourage you on the website that I gave you that we launched tomorrow. Some of it is already up. The resources are up. And there are a series of, I don't know, like about 14 podcasts. Are you familiar with the ones that I did with Elizabeth Lovius?
Yes.
They're on my website and on her website. And the first one is called One Cause, One Cure. Nothing broken, nothing lacking, one cause, one cure, which is going to be the name of the program that I'm going to start in late March. And then the next ones take the DSM 5 and the ICD-11 now, and they take the next one are stories of hope from my then 35 to 38 years of clinical experience, stories of hope with anxiety disorders. I mean, people that had been in their home for 30 years, let alone just people that had panic. Probably treated over 8,000 people with panic attacks, right? That didn't realize their panic attack was a gift, or like a rumble strip on the side of the road, trying to wake them up to stop hurting themselves before they got cancer or stroke or a heart attack, trying to help them. So stories of hope, anxiety disorders, stories of hope, depressive disorders, stories of hope, schizophrenia and psychotic disorders, stories of hope, trauma disorders. You know, a big thing in the United States right now is the body keeps score of your trauma. Well, there's a grain of truth in that. The body does keep score of what you haven't come to peace with from your past. But I will tell you, it doesn't keep it. Viktor Frankl, when he got out of the prison camp, the Auschwitz death camps in World War II, should have been dead within 3 years by the traumatologists. Instead, he lived to be well into his 90s and wrote 16 books. Or Mandela, or these are not exceptions to the rule. They are the rule in action. Viktor Frankl, in his book called The Doctor and the Soul, he says, it's kind of harsh. People could say it's harsh, but right to the point, he said, you can be a physician and not address the spiritual aspect of humanity. You can and still be a physician. But if you do so, the only difference between you and a veterinarian is your clientele. It's pretty harsh. So yes, there will be examples of eating disorders, of personality disorders, trauma disorders, child abuse. So there's every group you talk about. Yeah. And I can give you, I could give you, I had people, I had one man in the I had a number, actually, can I think of it? I mean, what can I say? In one of them that I can share with you if you'd like me to send it, and then you could translate it into Dutch. Two of them. One is a lady that had been 9 years, she was about 37. 9 years earlier, she had been raped and bitterly and physically assaulted for a number of hours by a patrolman that I don't know whether he, I don't know this, and she had had 23 admissions to the hospital in 9 years, many of them suicide attempts that she barely survived. And I came on the floor at WVU with a stack of Mr. Sidney Banks's missing links that the head nurse had requested because I had covered on that floor for a physician for 2 weeks, and just handing out Mr. Banks's missing link, he had seen miracles happen. So he got permission from the doctors for me to bring 20 books over, and I did that, I'm sure, more than one time. And I came onto the floor, and this woman was screaming at the person across, and she said, "Why won't they just let me die? Why won't they just let me die?" And I would say most people would say I'm very respectful. I would never talk without introducing myself, without getting permission. And you might have heard this story, but I didn't. My mouth started moving. And I said, "Ma'am, whatever you want to die over is over. It's over." And she yelled and screamed at me for about 2 minutes. And then I said, what, that I didn't know her, etc. And I said, everything you said is true, but what I said is true also. It's over. It exists only as a memory right now in your head. And I know what you want. And she said, you don't know what I want. I said, well, I do. You're like the rest of us. You want to be at peace and be in a state of mind where you can give and receive love freely. And I left, put the books on the counter and I left. She was about 15 feet away from me. I heard that within 10 seconds, she said to the nurse behind the counter, how do I get to see that man when I get out of here? Subsequently, she was off all medications. It was over a period of time. She came to group over a year's time. She had 4.5 years before she was sadly killed in an accident when somebody ran through a stoplight at somebody full of alcohol. But her mother called me up and said, you know, I am so grateful for the last 4.5 years that I thought I'd never have. She was getting ready to go to law school when she died. I can see the intellectual disabilities. I consulted for probably 5 years to the hospital for the autism and intellectual disabilities in the state of South Dakota. When I left there, they threw me a party. And I'll tell you, these are people with IQs probably in their 30s and 40s. But mental well-being, the soul, it doesn't have anything to do with the computer. It doesn't have anything to do with the computer. They were full of love. The vast majority of them had learned how to live in the present, the only thing that exists, the present moment. So I could go on, but yes, I rather than tell more, but yes, I have, there are the number of, I would encourage people to watch those videos. Yes.
Thank you very much, Bill. We have a question which was sent to us through Instagram. I'll read it to you if you like. When you are aware that out of habit, you use thinking in ways that cause fretting, anxiety, and tension. How do you get out of that habit? Listening to you, I understand the signals my body is giving me are getting stronger, and that causes more fretting. How does one get out of that cycle?
Okay. It takes more understanding. I mean, it takes, you know, learning these 3 principles of universal thought, you know, universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness. Let me speak to it kind of briefly. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for, I'm just going to say it. What Mr. Banks is experiencing, and he's not asking anyone to believe anything he says, and I don't believe anything that Mr. Banks said because he said it. I've never found anything that he pointed to that I didn't come to realize was true for me. That what's behind life, what this formless energy from which, you know, even the quantum physicists say, David Bohm, even Planck, people say that what God is the God mind, they call it, the physicists call it, is that the entire universe is the same energy in a different disguise. Now that's bigger than my little pea brain can handle, but I get it. That when David Bohm, the quantum physicist, write the wholeness, the implicate order, that there is nothing that is separate from anything else. We have this illusion of separateness, but that we're the same energy in a different disguise. That means we're all divine energy. Everything is. My lemon tree in the backyard is divine imagery, divine energy in a form. But unlike human beings, as Mr. Banks says on, I think it's page 6 of the missing link, unlike human beings, I can reject, I can use the person, I have an access to the personal use of mind. There's only one mind, but I get to use that energy of that universal mind or divine mind, whatever you want to call it, to navigate my way through life. I get to use the power and creative principle of thought with a capital T that has created all of the planets and all of the billions and billions of stars. And I love this thing this last week where they realized that the center core of the Earth, with new instruments that they have, has stopped spinning. But now they think that it's getting ready to go the opposite direction. And that it's probably been doing that every 50 to 70 years for as long as it's existed. That's divine energy in a form. It's intelligent, it's conscious, and it's creative. That's what the principles are pointing to, that all of creation is omni-knowledgeable, omni-aware, omni-creative. And that we get to use those three aspects of this one gift, this one gift that you could call mind or God or Dave or whatever you want to call it. We get to use the creative, the conscious, and the intelligent use of that knowledge to go through life. But if we don't know that it's there, we try to do everything with our intellect. And then we wonder why we're miserable. And here's what he says on page 6, and I'm drawn to share this, so I think I will. Each living soul lives life as an individual. This is why we all human beings live and see a separate reality. That's why our spouse does not live in the same world that we do. We don't. And it took me years to realize that. When I met Mr. Banks, I went, oh, it's not who's right or wrong. It's about listening so I can understand the world that this person I love lives in. That's different. The divine truth that lies within each living soul never changes. It's eternal. The divine passes from the formless to the form. And as human beings, we are both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. The animals and the plants and everything in the universe is a participant, but we're a spectator. We can actually know that that's what we are. I don't think the cat or the dog or my lemon tree or the flowers out there knows what they are. They don't, and they don't have the ability to say, I'm not making lemons this year. I'm going to do my own thing, and then wonder why it doesn't work out. The great mystics of the world who tried to explain such knowledge had no choice but to speak in metaphors, knowing that their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom. And I'm going to answer that question. I'm answering it this way, but I'll try to consolidate it. The spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. I've had a number of people that sought me out. They wanted to argue that they didn't have that. And I got spanked as a kid for a reason. I earned every one of them. And so I would say, oh my gosh, let's say his name is Jimmy Thompson. I'd say, oh my gosh, Jimmy, I just saw something I'd never seen before in my book. They'd say, what do you see, Dr. Pettit? I'd say, well, there's a little asterisk after this says wisdom, this spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. There's an asterisk that says, except for Jimmy Thompson, he doesn't have it. Oh my gosh, Jimmy, I am so sorry. I will get a refund of your money. It'll be in the mail tomorrow. Shall we talk sports? Who's your favorite soccer team? Jimmy will say, well, doctor, I don't want to be special. I say, here's the deal, Jimmy, you're not. You're like the rest of us. You have this spiritual wisdom inside of you too. It's at the core of who you are. All human psyches are rooted in universal truth, and no person's psyche is better than any others. Only to the degree of the individual's psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. That's what allowed me to talk to those people with the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia and know that they were just as healthy as I was, only they didn't know it. So fast forward, I'm at WVU University. I'm asked to cover for a friend of mine for 2 weeks as he went on vacation. And I'm sitting in front of this young woman who's 26 years old, who's in for her 7th admission in 5 months, or 5th admission in 7 months. Maybe that was it, but it was a lot. She's 26 years old. She had a college degree. She was married, had a 6-year-old. She'd gotten into manic episodes. She now was in a full-blown manic episode. She had been awake for 46 hours, something like that. She was on 2,100 milligrams of lithium. She was on 800 milligrams of quetiapine, which in the United States they call Seroquel. It's the maximum dose. And she still was not sleeping. I think if most of us, if you gave us 25 milligrams of Seroquel, we would be down for 12 to 14 hours. She was on 800 and she was talking 300 miles an hour, 200 to 300 miles an hour. She had not slept for 46 hours. And I sat quietly trying to see if maybe I could understand what she was saying, because I knew she was trying to communicate something, but I couldn't. And I asked her if she could just stop for 60 seconds. I knew it was hard for her not to be the pressure she felt to talk. If you've ever been around somebody in even a hypomanic episode, let alone a manic. And so she nodded and she stopped. And I said to her, I said, Molly, you are perfectly mentally healthy. You just don't know it. You've gotten caught up in some upsetting thinking about something. It's not even important what it was. You've dysregulated your whole physiology. You've literally turned genes on that shouldn't be turned on and turned off genes that should be turned on, so that you can't even express what you want to say in a way that anybody can understand. 6 months later, fast forward, she's now fast tracking in a nursing program. She's now a neurological nurse. She was when I left at West Virginia. She's fast tracking in an 18-month nursing program. She's off all quetiapine, 800 milligrams. She's gone from 2,100 down to 300 of lithium. She's working on the weekends as a certified nurse assistant while she's going to nursing school during the week so she could have insurance for her 6-year-old child. She's sleeping 8 hours a night. Her panic attacks have stopped, and she's having a wonderful life. And the psychiatric resident said to her, after we finished our presentation, she's sitting right next to me, all these psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, social workers, etc. The psychiatric resident, a resident in training, a doctor training to be a psychiatrist, he asked a very good question. Have you heard this?
No.
He said to her, he said, Molly, what did you think? What did you think when this Dr. Pettit said to you in the midst of a full-blown psychosis where you were just, most people would say crazy, that he told you you were perfectly mentally healthy? What did you think? And she was a cute little gal, and she had later presented with Linda and I at some presentations. But her eyes kind of sparkled, and she said, well, the first thought that I had was, oh my God, they have given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. No, I'm not kidding. I'm not making this up. The first thought I had was, oh my God, they have given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Now, to me, that's brilliant, that in the midst of her psychosis, she could say, oh my God, and I thought I was crazy. And then she got quiet, a little quiet for just a little bit. And she said, but shortly after that, another thought came from a different place. And the thought was, I knew that what he had just said was absolutely true. And that's when the healing began. Wow.
We have a raised hand.
Okay.
Bill. Elise, will you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Well, I'm
honored to have you here, Phil. It's so nice. I love your stories. I love Molly's story. And could you please elaborate on what you said earlier on about the body keeping score of trauma?
I'd said the body doesn't keep score of trauma. It keeps score of anything in your life that you haven't come to peace with.
Oh, okay. Well, then I think I need to hear more because I didn't hear that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just say that, and there is something that I want to share at the end here to take 2 or 3 minutes, but I would encourage everybody. I don't know, what books do you have of Mr. Banks's available in the Netherlands at this point? Any in Dutch?
All of them, not in Dutch, but all of them in
No.
English.
Okay, but all in English, and
Yes.
is there any request or any effort to be made to start translating it? I mean, because is there a lot of population that doesn't speak English or not?
Well, we pride ourselves of being able to speak English.
Okay. Well, I just so encourage people to go to Mr. Banks's and the videos. I'm sure the Long Beach videos,
Yes.
the Hawaii
Yes.
video. I just encourage you to go there because it is about seeing the connection between the spiritual nature and our psychological thought created nature and our physical nature. And our body is just manifesting our state. We're all going to die of something. So it's not that we're never going to die. But we're supposedly programmed to, the scientists say, to live 115 years. I saw where that nun over in France died at 118 last week. But most of us die, what, 60s, 70s, 50s? I would have, if I had not met Mr. Banks, there's no doubt I would have been dead probably in my late 50s from stress related, from all the dysregulation. So I don't know that, again, that there's one on there's there's many of my lectures on that, and there's a tape on the thing. I had a lady that had a sack of allergy pills this big, that once she got a deep level of peace, her allergies disappeared, because that's the immune system. I could tell you, if you went to and it's not a should, it's about, I don't know if you've read, do you know the book Perfect Misfortune, which is written by Alan Flood? I encourage people. Alan Flood he met Sid. It was part of his master's degree back in the late 70s. And then he admits he got going in his life really fast and probably and he got multiple sclerosis. It's been over 40 years now that he's had multiple sclerosis. And the title of his book is Perfect Misfortune. He said, my multiple sclerosis saved my life. It stopped me cold and reminded me to go inside. He still works 20 hours a week. He can only take one trip down the ski slope, one trip a day, instead of all day for 10 hours. But he's so grateful for that one trip. So I'd love to tell a story about my sister, if I could, who died May 2020 in a dementia unit in Connecticut. She's only 18 months older than I. But I think it tells the story of the difference between identifying yourself with your brain or with the energy that powers the brain. Have you heard, do you know this story?
I have heard it, yes.
Yeah.
But most of the other people haven't.
Have
So
not.
Please.
Well, my sister in 1986, when we were living in Florida, my sister and her husband, wonderful husband, and her two beautiful 16 and 19-year-old daughters came to visit us for the 4th of July weekend with 4 of our 6 children, and my parents were there. And to make a long story short, it's a tragic story. Her 2 daughters were killed by a drunk driver. They went out that evening and they were coming back, and this man, very, very drunk, slammed into them and killed them both, driving on the wrong side of the road. And there's no judgment in my mind because I haven't had to deal with that. Do I know there's a level of understanding that no matter what we deal with, we're given? I do. There's no doubt in my mind. But I think my sister, who was a beautiful woman and a very, very brilliant woman, her IQ, I'm sure, was higher than mine, but she got dementia like 10 years, about age late 60s. She got dementia that progressed to where she had no memory of that happening. She was saved. People say, what do you say? She didn't have to suffer anymore. If somebody mentioned Kathy and Sarah, she heard them mention, she'd say, oh, I talked with them just the other day. They're doing fine. They're doing fine. So before we went to Spain in 2019, my wife and I stopped by, and I said, I want to see, I feel like she's gonna, this was before the pandemic, but something just told me she's going home pretty soon. By the way, this is our second home. We came from the formless into the form. We're going back home. Nothing to be frightened about. That's a whole nother thing we could talk about. There's nothing to be scared about death. So I said, I think she's going home pretty soon, and this is probably the last time we'll see her. So we went to the nursing home. We spent 2 or 3 days there, and our conversations with if you tape them, they made no sense, but there was laughter. She would say something that made no sense. I would say what came to my mind in response to what she said, and she would laugh, and she would say something, and I would say something, and there was no sense to it, but it was a beautiful feeling every time we visited. So this goes on for 2 days, and we're leaving and have a sense this is probably the last time I'll see my sister. And my wonderful wife, who I met on February 14th, 20 years ago, this February 14th, when she came to give a talk at the university, she's a PhD counseling psychologist. She gave a talk on the healing power of unconditional love. And we both had been widowed about 3 years, and we got married 7 months later, and we're going to celebrate our 20-year anniversary later this year. But take me back to why I went off on that. I'm sorry. Where was I? So my wife, Linda, says to Peggy as we're leaving, I don't know how she was moved. This happens to her all the time because she's in touch. She said she got really close to Peggy, and we had 2 days of nonsensical conversations. She got right in front of Peggy's face, and she said, Peggy, it's all right, isn't it? Peggy looked at Linda, and she put her hands on her cheeks, and she said, Linda, it's really all right. And then she kissed her softly on the lips and said, I love you so very, very much. Wait, what? What happened to this demented person? So then it was my turn, and I probably wiped a tear from my eye, as I'm doing now. And I said, Peggy, would it be okay with you if I kissed you on your right cheek? And she said, Billy, of course. So I kissed her on the right cheek, and without permission, I quickly kissed her on the left cheek. And I said, now, Peggy, I know I didn't have permission to kiss you on the left cheek. Was that okay? And this terribly demented person looked at me, and her eyes sparkled, and she said, Billy, it was perfect. If we identify with what we create with our thinking rather than our spiritual nature, we're going to find life very, very difficult. I'm going to stop there. I encourage you to go to Mr. Banks's materials.
Thank you. That was a perfect answer.
Good, good.
Can I have I would like to, I was listening to you, I think last week, no, the week before, when you and Judy were doing the reading of the books, and you were talking about phobias being also a sign of mental health, in that it helps people to control their anxiety.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a sign of mental health, but it is the effort of divine mind to allow us our free will. We have the power of free thought and free will, but to try to both limit the impact of our misunderstanding and our misuse of those principles, at the same time trying to wake us up. And so if I can be afraid of spiders or heights or widths or whatever, if I can localize my anxiety, then I may still be able to function in life. But what we want to do is to be at peace. And nobody that I've ever met anybody at peace who has a phobia.
It's more of an intermediate step.
It's an alarm system. It's a love letter. The alarms will keep getting louder and louder. If you and I are sitting in the movie theater and we're really enjoying the movie and the fire alarm goes off, if they don't have the volume set high enough, we may not even hear it. And then the fire alarm realizes nobody's leaving, so the fire alarm gets louder. And a lot of people leave, but some people say, I'm really enjoying this movie. I have a friend who says, sadly, Dr. Pransky, he could say things like this without cracking a smile. He'd say, sadly, for some people, death is an early warning sign. Because they're not in tune enough to hear the other and see them as warning signs. And so many times people get an illness, and then instead of seeing it as a gift to like my friend did, they then now start thinking of, oh, I must be being punished for, especially if they grew up with what's behind life is, instead of pure love and understanding, is judgment and punishment. Then there's none of us that couldn't make up a reason why we're being smacked. Because we're human beings. But what's behind life is not judgment. That's what's revolutionary. That's what made Sid cry when he saw the true meaning of God. Number one, that we were not separate from it, that energy, but that it was pure love and understanding, not judgment and punishment. He's not asking anybody to believe that. But do you know that there's an organization in all 195 countries that's based on unconditional love? Did you know that? It's called grandparenting. It's called grandparenting. Because they've let go, most of them have let go of all the concerns about what people think, and they just love their grandchildren unconditionally. Parents want to love their children unconditionally, but they get caught so often. I mean, the terrible extreme is that case of that Iranian woman that was strangled to death by her father, as an honor killing. Holy crap. And yet my compassion strangely goes out to for him too. That you could believe that would make sense. To take the life of your child because they saw things different than you did. Wow. But all we can do is just take care of our own well-being. That's all we can do, and share what we see. It's not about being in judgment of other people. It's about having compassion and seeing that people are truly doing, including having compassion for ourselves and being gentle with ourselves. instead of judging, I should be doing this faster. I should be learning this faster. I've been around the principles so long. Why am I upset? No. Be gentle. Be gentle. People ask me, what do you do when you have a thought thunderstorm? I do the best that I can to be where I am. Just doing that. That's all I have to do. It's real simple. And my mind quiets down 100% of the time as I do the best I can to be where I am without judgment of how I'm doing.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on.
Shall we quit while we're behind?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Bill.
You're welcome.
It has been a wonderful-
Would I didn't ask, but I will ask, will I be able to have a copy of this for
Yes,
myself?
of course. Yes, of course. We always do that. We always share
Okay.
this with you, of course, because you're the original. Of
Well, no, but thank you. And thanks to everybody. And yeah, I hope to get back to your beautiful country again sometime.
You're most welcome.
Check the website out tomorrow.
Yes, we will.
We will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
you.